Everybody, welcome to the latest of my live sessions on Facebook, regularly on a Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. Today I'm going to, first of all I'm going to sport my new lockdown haircut that the daughter's boyfriend had a go at. Won't be letting him near me with a pair of clippers anytime soon, but at least we got rid of some of it. Anyway, today what I'm going to talk to you about is giving you some tips for how to pass your driving test, and also how to use this time during lockdown to try and improve your chances of passing, even though obviously at the moment we're not allowed to partake of driving lessons in the car. So first thing that you've got plenty of time is nail the theory test. Really try and concentrate on getting your theory test passed. It's really important that the theory test is out of the way so that you can get on with your practical driving test when you're ready, when you've done enough lessons. And now is a great time to be practicing it. You've got your question side, you've got your hazard perception. Also, quite importantly, assuming you are preparing for it, is to think about getting it booked. Because as of yesterday they've postponed or suspended theory tests again until the 30th of May, and that's going to be building up a backlog. So when they do restart, you want to try to make sure that you're near the front of the queue. Also think about the fact that social distancing is probably going to affect their capacity to do tests, so the capacity is likely to be impacted. So try and get on with that theory test. And some of the ways you can do that: think about knowing your traffic signs. Being able to instantly recognise your traffic signs and understand them is crucial to safe driving, and it's going to help you on your driving test if you've got that. You're aware of what traffic signs mean, you're aware of where they're going to be, and you're able to immediately deal with them. To try and help yourself, think about printing some out. Create yourself some flashcards. Maybe get other people to have a look at them with you and test you on them. You also are likely to have friends who are also learning to drive, and there's no reason why any number of you could get together and try and test each other. We're all familiar now with the concept of Zoom quizzes, get-togethers. Why not take the opportunity to use that technology and get yourself testing each other and helping each other, so that when you come to do your theory test, you're all ready and you absolutely nail it and get it passed. As well as the questions, there's also the hazard perception side of the theory test. Here there are lots and lots of online resources that you can use to help yourself learn that. There are plenty available via my website. If you have a look at there's a completely free theory app which will cover the hazard perception and the question side of things. It will help you to pass both, but they're also linked to a few specific hazard perception tests. You can also practice when you're a passenger in the car. Just be on the lookout for what's going on around you, and just think to yourself, would that be a click? When would that click? When would be too late to click? That sort of thing. But just try and keep it at the forefront of your mind, so that when you come to again sit it, you're good and ready. Show me, tell me's. These are part of your driving test, obviously, but also they're potentially relevant when you're looking at the theory test. Now is the time to bring them to life. You've got plenty of cars sitting dormant in the drive. They're not going very far. Why not go outside with a family member, get the bonnet open and have a proper look at it. Look at underneath the bonnet, see what's going on. Don't limit yourself to just what it talks about in the Show Me Tell Me. Under the bonnet it only talks about three things: brake fluid, engine coolant and engine oil. But there's loads more going on under there. I did a video the other day about a flat battery. There are going to be lots and lots of people with flat batteries at the moment, because if the car's sat and not doing anything, over time the charge will trickle away. Especially if there's a black box fitted. Those little black boxes, they do tend to carry on doing a little bit of work even when the car's not running, and that over time will flatten your battery. So there's lots to find out about. Bring it to life. You'll feel a lot more confident if your examiner at the beginning of your test says to you, right, I'd like you to open up your bonnet, and point out to me as X, Y, or Z. You know, they're going to ask you a safety question. Another thing that we can do in the lockdown is things like these Facebook sessions, Facebook Live. I'm not going to pretend for one moment that I'm the only person doing this, because there are going to be plenty of other people doing similar things. But if you look on the internet, you can find these sorts of things going on, and they may provide you with information that helps you keep your skills current. On this session, it is live. If you have any questions for me, just put them in the comment box, and I'll interrupt what I'm saying and answer them for you. So it gives you the chance to take advantage of those of us that are in the industry for free, basically. So again, something else that will allow you to keep up a little bit of practice even when we're in lockdown. Now, a couple more that, you know, many people won't be able to do just because they haven't got the facilities, but some people may be able to have the luxury of doing a couple of these, and if so, why not? Low speed maneuvers. As I say, they're not for everyone, but if you're lucky enough to have a good sized drive, then maybe some practice at moving the car very slowly to improve your clutch control. Help yourself understand what you can really do with that clutch, you know, when you just edge the car forward slowly, how you can stop it, etc., etc. Maybe a bit of reverse steering to help you really understand how the back of the car reacts when you turn the wheel left or right, and, you know, start to try and get that a little bit more innate, so that when you do get back to these subjects in your lessons, you know, everything fits into place much more easily, and come your driving test, you're able to react much more naturally if things are not going exactly as you practice them on your lessons. Now, as I said earlier, we're not allowed to do practical lessons at the moment, and neither are you allowed to go out for a drive with your parents or family members simply for the purposes of practicing. But if you are insured on a car because you've got, for example, learner driver insurance, again, if you look on my website, you can find out about at least two options there, Marmalade and Collingwood, that provide learner driver insurance, that allows you to practice when you're accompanied by an appropriately qualified driver. You could, if your standard is high enough and you know you're confident driving the car with a certain amount of independence and being overseen by a family member, maybe you could help out with some of the essential trips that are allowed. So going to the supermarket, for example, that could give you an opportunity to even just once a week get 5, 10, 15 minutes, depending on how far away you live from your supermarket, behind the wheel. And at the moment the roads are pretty quiet, so it's a relatively low pressure environment compared to what it could be. So those are a few things that you know, you might want to think about doing during lockdown to try and keep your skills fresh. But now I'd like to talk specifically about a few tips for passing the driving test itself. So this is in response to a request from one of the viewers of one of my previous sessions. So tips for passing your driving test. And first of all, the 3 P's. Preparation, preparation, preparation. As with all things in life, if you want to be successful, then you have to make sure that you've prepared properly. And this is going to start almost from your first lesson, you know, really taking notice of what's going on and putting your all into it. If you prepare properly, then you'll get the result you want, and hopefully you'll get that result first time. So, my tips for, or some of my tips for passing your driving test. First one, during lockdown, follow some of the advice that I've given you above. If you can keep your skills current and to the forefront of your mind, then you're going to be in a much stronger position when you pick up your lessons again and then when you go for your test. Number 2, make sure that you take enough quality lessons with a driving instructor. Remember, the DVSA say that the average number of hours taken for driving lessons before somebody passes a test is 45 with an ADI, which is a approved driving instructor. Plus, 20 hours of private practice. Okay, so that's the average across the UK. My personal average experience over the last 9 years has been around about 37.5 hours from a complete beginner to passing their test. And some of these have been with and some without private practice. I do record everybody on my website, so if you want to get an idea as to what the sort of maximums and minimums or the highs and the lows are of that, you can have a look at the data there and sort of see how many on average lessons people are taking, how many hours. As I said, from the outset, take your lessons seriously. Engage with your instructor. Help them to help you by making sure that you have input into your lessons. Don't be just a passive learner where you just do what you're told. Instead, give feedback on what you're confident with and what you're not. The more you can discuss with your instructor what you're thinking, what you're feeling, the more they're going to be able to help you, and also they're going to be able to try and come up with ideas together with yourself to maybe address some of the problems that you're aware of that you're having. Remember, they can only interpret what they're seeing. It's the same as on your driving test. I often say to pupils that some pupils find, for example, commentary driving or talking about what they're thinking is a useful process for making the right decision. And what I urge you to do is on your driving test is still do that. If saying what you're thinking is helping you, the examiners are not going to think that this is anything particularly out of the ordinary. They will have seen it before, so don't stop doing it. What it also does is it helps them understand what you're thinking, and really importantly that you're thinking, and therefore they can better judge whether you're going to make a good driver who deserves a driving license on that day. If somebody's in a difficult situation and they're trying to think it through, and maybe they're taking a little bit long to get out of a junction, for example, there may be very good reason for that. And if they say what they've seen and what they're thinking, the examiner can better interpret that their decisions making is good, rather than just maybe thinking, oh, they look like they're being a bit hesitant or whatever it might be. So try to keep that dialogue going. As I say, when you're doing your driving lessons, try to make sure that you're talking to your instructor as well, and feeding back to them exactly how you're getting on. Next, try and make sure that you work or practice between your lessons. Anything you can do in between is going to help improve your rate of learning. This could be home study that maybe you've agreed with your instructor on the lessons, or it could be private practice, or it could be self-reflection. I try and get my pupils to write in a little notebook about what's happened in a lesson, and try and think back about it. Going over it in your mind can help reinforce it, and maybe again give rise to different questions or different points of views that are going to help you come back to the next lesson and really tackle the things that matter and that need sorting. You could even just try actively watching other driving styles or others driving, or how they make their decisions. Talk to family and friends about it, when they're driving, to see what they know and see if that can help you get a different perspective on things or give you advice. I'd probably counsel against criticising your parents driving, because that tends not to have the desired effect when you tell them that, oh, Darrell says you shouldn't be doing that. They'll have learnt differently, and as I say, they'll tend not to appreciate that. But if you just discuss with them what they're doing, you may well find that you get a useful piece of information out of it. Now, many people do mock tests, and again, I would suggest that you try to take these seriously and make them feel important to you. Don't sort of treat them just as a something that doesn't matter too much if you don't pass. As an example, not completely relevant, but I'm sure that there's plenty of pupils, GCSE pupils up and down the country at the moment, that maybe wish that they'd taken their mocks a bit more seriously this year, bearing in mind that those are potentially now going to be used to give their grades. But my reasons for you taking your mock seriously is to try and make them important, so you create a little bit of nervous tension. Because if you can start to get used to what it feels like to drive nervously, or when you've got some nerves, then that's going to put you in a stronger position when you've got this stranger sat next to you, looking at your every move and marking them down. The ways that I suggest to people to try and do this are to set yourself a target so that you know what you're trying to aim for. Maybe have a friendly bet with somebody about how well you can do. So it could be just that you'll do all the washing up for a week if you don't pass, or whatever it might be. It's your target. It doesn't have to be a pass. It might be a certain number of minors or whatever it could be. Or maybe ask a family member or a friend to sit in the back so they can actually watch you doing it. That's bound to create a bit of nerves for you, and as again, help better prepare you for the real thing. Next point, try and make sure that you really understand what the purpose of the driving test is, and that its overarching aim is to try and put safe and competent drivers on the road. If you keep this in mind and you can properly gauge and understand what constitutes safe, competent and legal, then you'll have a better feel for whether you're ticking that box, and maybe you will worry less about whether your examiner is nitpicking, which I think a lot of people feel that they are, that they're looking for reasons to fail you. That's not the case. They're looking for reasons to stop unsafe people being on the road, but they're not out to stop you passing your test if you can demonstrate safe, legal and competent driving. Keep your focus holistic and rounded in your latter lessons. Many people want to focus very heavily on manoeuvres as they get closer and closer to the test, and in my opinion on some occasions it could be more beneficial to be focusing on general roadcraft, because when you think about your test, only about 2 to 3 minutes of your test will actually be on the manoeuvre. The other 37 minutes or so are going to be out and about on the road, and they're going to be much more important on, much more influential on whether you pass or not. So don't get too hung up on perfection for manoeuvres if you're not 100% in other areas such as roundabouts and road markings, etc. On your manoeuvre, good enough will avoid a fail, but if you've been spending too much time practicing on your manoeuvres and you've let other aspects of your driving suffer, then the chances are you will make a mistake during that test that will not get you a pass. And finally, and this is still all talking about your sort of the lesson side of thing and getting the best out of that as you prepare for your driving test, but try and wean yourself off the need for positive feedback. Now, what I mean by this is that quite often your instructor is going to be telling you that you've done something well, and they're going to help you. That's one of the ways certainly in the early days you're going to understand that you are doing things well. But over time, you should find that your instructor's saying less and less and less. And if they're continuing to praise you constantly as you get closer and closer to test, that may not actually be doing you any favours, because you may find that you're starting to rely on that as a sort of crutch. The fact that they say it went well means it went well, and rather than you judging for yourself that things are going well. During your driving test, your examiner will not give you any positive feedback. The only feedback you're going to get is what you imagine them to be thinking or marking. And you don't want a lack of feedback to make you feel uneasy. So, as I say, don't start to rely on positive feedback as your only indicator that you're doing well. You need to be able to judge that for yourself. You can discuss it with your instructor about how things have gone, but don't be looking for every little thing that you do to be a pat on the back for every little thing you do, because you will not get that during your driving test. So, getting closer to the test day itself, a few tips for in the run-up to your driving test. Now, first of all, very importantly, make sure your admin's right. Okay? Check your driving test confirmation carefully. When you make your booking online, assuming you've done it to the correct website, you will get an email back very shortly after the booking. Check that. Make sure that it's correct with what you believe you'd booked, and make sure you get the email. Make sure it's not in your junk or spam folders before you start calling the DVSA, because sometimes you'll find that's where it is rather than in your inbox. I always get my pupils to forward the confirmation to me so that I can double check it, also make sure that it fits in my diary as we agreed. And as a second point there, make sure that your instructor has agreed that they're available at the time that you want to book your test. Also, keep an eye on those folders in your email in the weeks before your test, just to make sure that you don't miss any updates from the DVSA. They will sometimes change or cancel your driving test, and you don't want to miss that and then turn up on the day only to find out that your driving test is 2 or 3 weeks away or a month away, and you've just got yourself worked up for no reason. They won't go ahead if if you've missed any changes. Secondly, try to understand the part that nerves might play on the day for yourself. If you think that anxiety is key to you, then you do want to try and find ways of dealing with it. You're going to be better placed than I am about how that could be, but some things that I've tried with people in the past, I've suggested that they try soothing CDs or maybe some kind of hypnotherapy CDs, that sort of thing. You can get plenty of those. Things like calms, maybe, to just reduce how nervous you're feeling. Maybe music, quiet music, you can play that during your test if you want. Also, when you book your test, consider the best time of day for you. Do you want more or less traffic? Do you want it to be out of the way as soon as possible in the morning to avoid worrying about the build-up? Or are you a morning or an afternoon person? All these things could be factors in you making your decision about the time of day to book your test. If you've got a regular lesson time, it might make sense to try and fit in with that so that you've got used to the sort of traffic levels. But again, it is something to be thought about when you're trying to book your test date. Get a good understanding of what constitutes a serious or dangerous fault. And again, this is going to help you gauge any mistakes that you might make during the test itself. A few weeks ago, I did a video talking about the 10 most common reasons for failing a driving test. So that would give you an idea as an example. Your instructor would also be able to give you plenty of examples, I'm sure, of mistakes that they've seen. But try to make sure that you understand what is good and what isn't, because again, that will help you feel more confident on your test day. If you make a mistake, you'll be able to say to yourself, okay, right, well, that I didn't break the law, I didn't do anything unsafe there, I didn't move in a way that would have caught another driver out, whatever it might be. You can be confident in yourself that that's not going to cost you your driving test, and hopefully carry on driving to a good standard. Use online resources to try and reinforce your show me tell me's. The reason I say this is because driving lessons cost money, and there's plenty of help out there for show me tell me's that you can do in your own time, and then just supplement it so that when you do go for your show me tell me's, or if you use the Powdery acronym to even going a bit further to journey preparation, then you will be able to fly through that rather than having to spend an hour whilst your driving instructor explains to you that these black rubber things on the outside of the cars are tyres. Also, make sure that you know how your lights and your wipers and your demisters work in case the weather makes them necessary. They're your responsibility. You don't want your examiner suggesting to you that it might be a good idea to put your wipers on when it's pouring with rain. That's part and parcel of driving. Could be that your driving lessons, you're lucky enough that you very rarely have to put them on, and then on the day of your driving test, bang, it's raining. Make sure that you know how to put them on. Now the next one is about family and friends, really. You are going to, well, it depends. You're not going to tell people when your driving test is. Plenty of people keep it a secret, just to try and reduce the pressure. But even if they don't know exactly when it is, some people will know that you've been learning to drive, and you might start to get advice given to you. My advice to you, if this happens, is share it with your instructor to get them to validate it. Much of what people say, especially people of my age, where we passed our driving tests back in the 80s and 90s and what have you, it was different back then to some extent, and they'll pass on information or advice that maybe their driving instructor gave them, and some of that's changed now. Some of it's urban myth, so some of it's just plain wrong. Your instructor can help you understand what's good advice and what's bad advice. A common one I hear is that people say, oh, driving slowly is going to help you pass, so drive nice and slowly on your driving test, you don't want to be speeding. And people take it too far, and they're crawling along, and they get back, and then they're really surprised when the examiner turns around and says, I'm sorry, you've not been successful today, would you like me to tell you why? And one of the reasons to tell you is because your progress has been seriously too slow and they failed you under appropriate speed. So that's just one example, but validate any advice you get from your family and friends with your instructor. And then on the night before the test, get a good night's sleep and make sure you've got anything that you need to take with you. So make sure you know where your provisional driving license is and you've got it with you when you get in the car with your instructor the next day. Have your email confirmation. You probably won't need to produce it, but it's always good to be able to show it just in case there are any disputes. Just have it on your phone. You don't have to have a printout, anything like that. Make sure you've got your glasses, any contact lenses, anything like that. And if you've got one, take a lucky mascot. So the big day arrives and it's time to sit your driving test. So during the driving test, what can you do? Well, here's a few tips for during the driving test itself. So first of all, allow time for any comfort break that you might need before the examiner arrives. It's not good etiquette for the examiner to arrive and then the first thing you say is, okay, we have time to nip to the loo. Get all that done before they get there. So give yourself time for that. The waiting room is, can be a little bit of a odd atmosphere, a waiting room, a bit like being at the dentist or the doctor's. If that's going to put you off, then consider waiting outside the door or in the corridor or even just outside the building if that's convenient to do so. You don't have to wait inside. As long as you're available when the examiner comes to collect you, they'll be fine with that. Quite often in Halifax, for example, it's quite a small waiting room, and this happens in Huddersfield as well, that an examiner will call somebody out of the room anyway because it just isn't run by the time you've got 5 or 6 examiners, 5 or 6 candidates and 5 or 6 instructors all crammed into a very tiny room. So it's not going to be an issue if you're not inside at the time. Next one is the examiner themselves. Now, I suggest that you try to think of your examiner as somebody that you've employed. They're working for you, rather than think of them as a figure of authority. Most will now try to be relaxed and friendly. Most of the stern or formal examiners are a thing of the past, and they've left the industry. So consider to yourself that you're paying good money to this person to assess your driving and give you a license. They're working for you, and hopefully this can lift a bit of the pressure rather than you thinking of them as somebody, he or she, who must be obeyed, and the pressure that might bring to bear. When you meet your examiner, try and give him a nice confident smile. I would have said shake hands firmly in many cases, but obviously currently that's not the done thing. Maybe do a little elbow nudge if you want, that could break the ice. Have your license to hand for them to check. try and get off on the right foot. Try and just avoid any initial awkwardness. You'll be asked to sign a couple of declarations on an iPad. Although it's tricky, try and make this resemble the signature on your license as best you can. If they will use this sort of as their ID check, if it's completely different, they may ask you to do it again, and again that can just sort of set you off on slightly the wrong foot if you have not if you're being challenged about who you are. You'll get asked a couple of extra questions. For example, whether you not want your instructor to sit in the back with you. Now, again, in the current climate, I suspect that's going to be changing. They may look for instructors not to accompany candidates for the first few months after we get restarted. But regardless of whether we come along or not, they'll always offer the opportunity for the instructor to be with you at the end for the debrief. And I would urge you to let your instructor listen in on the debrief. Most candidates, when they've been told whether it's good news or bad news, tend not to hear too much about what the examiner says afterwards about their performance during the test. And especially if you haven't been successful, it's important to understand where things didn't go as well as they could have done. And if your instructor's listening in, they'll be able to help work with you to get you back up to speed for your next attempt. The first few minutes, the examiner is just going to be giving you an overview of what the test involves. They're going to do your eyesight test, and then they're going to ask you to get yourself settled in the car. And whilst you're doing that, they're going to wander around the car, make a few notes, making sure that the car looks like it's in roadworthy condition. Assuming you're with a driving instructor, then they're going to also be taking a few details from their badge. They're going to get themselves in the car, get themselves settled, adjust the seat, that sort of thing. And then they're going to set the sat nav up. So all that's going to be going on whilst you're just basically getting yourself settled. So just try and use those few minutes to just try and calm yourself down, few deep breaths, get yourself comfortable, and if you need to use any of the driver aids such as the wipers, etc., then just make sure that you reminded yourself where they are and how to switch those on. Before you drive off, after the examiners explain to you what the test involves, the first thing they're going to do is ask you a tell me question. Now, if you know your stuff, there should be no problem. They're not necessarily looking for a textbook answer. They just want something that is pretty much reasonably correct and covers the bases of the sort of information they've asked you for. But again, nerves might get the better of you. You might have a complete brain freeze. Don't panic. The worst case scenario if this happens is you're going to get one minor fault. You're not going to fail your test because you didn't know where the ABS light was. So, just if that happens, just say, sorry, I don't know, and take the hit and let's get on with the driving. That's what we really came here to do. Show how good a driver you are. So once that's out and ready, your examiner is basically going to say to you, okay then, right, well, when it's safe to do so, drive on when you're ready. Don't rush off at the very start. Give yourself time to do the proper checks. Depending on what test centre you're at, you might be moving away from in a car park, so keep a quick look round to make sure that none of the other candidates are pulling away, or you might be on or you might be on a public road. So again, do your proper safety checks before you move away to make sure that you don't fall foul of any drivers coming up behind you. Remember, use your driver aids, wipers, demisters if you need them, and also remember to put them on during the driving test itself as well if you need them. Don't drive along in the rain without the wipers on. If you need them, get them switched on, and also switch them off too as well. There's nothing worse than driving along with a set of wipers squeaking along a dry windscreen. Drives me nuts. Drive on when you're ready. Remember, it's not a race. Also, if at any point during the driving test, if you're feeling your nerves are getting the better of you, or you're just not comfortable, maybe you're too hot, maybe you've got a bit of leg ache, then don't be afraid to ask to pull over. and take a few seconds to sort the issue out. As long as that's done safely and legally, your examiner won't have a problem. I've even had times when the examiner has suggested to a candidate early in a test that maybe they just pull over, and they'll just turn to them and just say, look, just take a few moments, take a few deep breaths. It's not that bad. I'm not going to bite you, whatever it might be, just to try and put you at your ease. So remember, everybody's out there to try and help you pass your test, including the examiner. They're not there to try and prevent you getting the license that you deserve. Now the next one, important, is to try and make sure you are listening out for the instructions from the examiner. Typically they're going to say things like take the next road on the left, at the roundabout go right third exit, pull up on the left in a safe place, stop behind the next parked vehicle, give yourself room to pull out, that sort of thing. Again, don't be in a rush to do what is asked. Make your checks, do it safely, do it legally. If you're not sure what was said, then ask for it repeated, but not too close to when action is actually needed, because we don't want any last minute decisions. But very importantly, remember, it's not where you go, but how you go that will determine success or failure. Again, referring back to the video that I did a few weeks ago about the 10 main reasons for failing the driving test. Mirrors change direction is a big one, where somebody will change the direction of the car without checking the mirrors first properly. And often that comes about when somebody suddenly realises that an instruction has been given for them to turn right, and that the right turn's just coming up, and they try and make the right turn suddenly rather than carrying on ahead. If you miss an instruction, it does not matter, as long as whatever you do, you do safely and legally. So whether you're following the sat-nav or the examiner or signs, if you don't go the right way but you go where you go correctly, you will not pick up any faults. This basically reiterates that point. Just make sure, yeah. So the key thing is not making any last minute decisions. If you're in the lane to go left and you suddenly realise the examiner wanted you to turn right, don't try and cut across to the right hand lane, go left. The examiner or the sat-nav or the signs, whatever it might be, will just get you turned and back on a route that gets you back to where you're supposed to be, and there'll be no harm done as long as what you do you do correctly. So, how to think about your examiner during the test and what they're doing. During the test, they're going to be using an iPad to record the result. Now these iPads have got privacy screens on and they work very well. I've sat in the back of many tests and I can't see what they're doing. Now I've got nothing to concentrate on in terms of driving. I can just put my attention on what they're doing on the screen, and I still can't tell what they're doing. So you, as a competent, careful driver whose attention should be on the road, have got no chance of understanding what the examiner is marking. So the best thing you can do is ignore it and concentrate on the road. In any case, even if you could see what the examiners were doing, a lot of the time when they're marking the iPad, they're not marking faults, they're marking administration. So for example, every time you pull over, they're going to make a mark to record what kind of scenario that was. When you complete a manoeuvre, they're going to be recording the manoeuvre. When they ask you to do your show me question, they're going to record that as well. So they're recording things on the screen that are not necessarily faults. But if every time they move the pen you are thinking, oh my god, I've done something wrong, you're going to get more and more nervous and your driving's going to deteriorate. Don't worry about them. They're just looking for safe driving. So let's go on to the next one. Again, similar vein, concentrating on your driving rather than any mistakes that you make. Now some people are quite self-critical and they're going to be totting up in their heads quite quickly any mistakes they make. But what you have to remember is that there is the fourth category of fault which is not worthy of note. So some examples of this could be, as long as you're not constantly doing it, maybe a slightly jolty stop or moving off, or your gear change wasn't as smooth as it could be, or maybe you didn't get particularly close to the curb when you pull up, or maybe a minor correction of your steering during the manoeuvre, and many other examples. These are things that, you know, are not really affecting the safety of the drive in any way, shape or form, and the examiners will more often than not, as long as they're not constantly happening, will completely overlook them. They're not looking for a chauffeur standard, they're looking for safe and legal. So let them do their job and assess your driving to their standards, not to what you think. Your only job is to drive safely and attentively. Also, in a similar vein, if you're sort of thinking that things have not gone as well as they could have been, don't give up. Even if you make a mistake that you think is unforgivable, try to put it out of your mind and continue to drive to a high standard. It may be that the examiner has a different view of what you've done, or they don't see it as a fail. But if you give up, you'll almost certainly make other mistakes that are serious, or you may forego the opportunity for the examiner to give you the benefit of the doubt. If you've done something that they weren't overly impressed by, but you know it's not a straight fail, then they may look to see how the rest of the drive goes, and if they see evidence that, you know, that was a bit of a blip, and that the rest of your driving looks good, then they may give you the benefit of the doubt. They may give you a hard time at the end of it, but you know, as long as they've given you that message that you've been successful and you've passed, then you can afford to spend a few minutes being dressed down by an examiner who just tries to make you aware that maybe you just need to still be a bit careful. And finally, again, around the area of just trying to stay relaxed during the test, the examiners may make small talk with you. As long as it doesn't affect your concentration, then speak back to them. If you feel too deep a conversation will put you off, then just keep your answers short, but keep them polite. You don't want to come across as rude, or that they're beneath you. Whilst you're not going out of your way to be a friend with your examiner, at the end of the day they're only human, and you don't want them to sort of feel slighted or take against you. Just in case, as I said in 11, you're maybe looking for that benefit of the doubt, you don't want to give them a personal reason to feel as though why should they do you any favours. So, as I say, if you're going to keep your answers short, just try and keep them polite. Or if you're in some kind of conversation with them, but maybe there's something a bit complicated coming up, just tell them that you're just going to answer them in a moment. You're just going to need to deal with the roundabout, the traffic lights, whatever it might be. Again, they'll be glad that you're giving more attention to your driving than their conversation with you about the weather. That shows good driving decisions, and they won't take against that. Some examiners, on the other hand, won't say anything at all other than the directions, and again, you may be used to a more relaxed environment when you're doing your lessons with your instructor. If that's the case and it makes you feel uneasy, then don't be afraid to try and start some small talk with them. There's no reason why you can't start the conversation if that helps you. If it's quiet and you're happy, then just carry on. That's fine as well. If you want to have the radio on, you're allowed to do that quietly during the test if that helps create a more comfortable environment for you. I've certainly had a few pupils do that. I've certainly had at least one or two pupils who maybe their issue was keeping their speed down. We've put classic FM on, and not necessarily something they liked, but the idea was that they associated slow classical music with going steadily, and that has helped them be successful as well. So having the radio on is also allowed. There's no reason why we have to drive around in absolute silence. So that brings me to the end of tonight's session, and hopefully you'll have picked up a few tips in there that will help you. If there's anything that you want to ask me about, then by all means anybody can do that now. I'll just carry on waffling for a few seconds to give people a chance to do that. But otherwise, you can post any questions to me via Facebook or via my website or via my YouTube channel. So hope you enjoyed that. I'll post this up on YouTube. It will be on my Facebook channel, so if you can like them, that would be great. And look forward to speaking to you all again next Thursday at 7 o'clock. Good night.